Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. On Friday, the Times of India broke the story about large sums of unaccounted cash found in Justice Yashwant's Varma's residence. Earlier, there was the case of Justice Shekhar Yadav, who blatantly breached judicial propriety and conduct with his statements. But in either case, has the judiciary acted effectively and responsibly? And if the answer is no, what does that suggest about the judiciary's in-house mechanism for accountability? And does it also raise questions about the way judges are chosen, particularly at the High Court level? Those are the key issues I should raise today with one of the most highly regarded former judges of the Supreme Court, Justice Madan Lokur. Justice Lokur, on Friday, the Times of India broke the story about large sums of unaccounted money found in Justice Varma's residence. Earlier, there was the case of Justice Yadav, who blatantly breached judicial propriety and conduct with his statements. In one case, effective action hasn't happened. In the second case, it happened belatedly after protests. Does that suggest the judiciary has an ineffective in-house mechanism for accountability, or that it's not implemented properly, or possibly both?
Well, you see, Karan, it's like this, a mechanism exists, right? Now, the question is, how do you implement that mechanism? I can tell you sometime back, maybe about 15 years ago, there was an allegation about a judge, again, unfortunately, from Delhi High Court. And when that allegation surfaced, the then Chief Justice of India called the judge and said that, listen, I have some material against you, right? And would you like to continue or would you like to resign? And the judge said that, I would like to resign. And he quit. Okay. So there was no need for any inquiry. The allegation against the judge was that, judgments were being outsourced, so to speak. So whether there was any money involved or not, I don't know. I don't think there was any money involved, but judgments were being outsourced. So a lot depends on, how the Supreme Court reacts to the allegations. Now, you mentioned about the judge from Allahabad High Court against whom, it was alleged that he gave some communally tainted speech. Now, the Supreme Court thought it fit to, call him to Delhi and discuss the matter with him. It seems, I don't know what happened, but it seems that he was asked to apologize and he declined to apologize. He may have apologized to the collegium, but it appears that he declined to apologize publicly. Now, is that a case of, a violation of the law, giving a speech of that nature? It could perhaps, amount to hate speech. If it does amount to hate speech, then there is a criminal law that, kicks in. There's no question of an inquiry because it's a hate speech. Now, so far as the present incident is concerned, yes, it appears that information about what had happened was brought to the notice of the Supreme Court, maybe on the 15th, maybe on the 16th, I don't know. The incident is supposed to have happened on the night of 14th. So if it was brought to the notice of the Supreme Court on the 15th, I think the Supreme Court should have acted swiftly at that point of time on the 15th and said that, this is the material that we have. The judge apparently came back to Delhi on the 15th. So maybe on the 16th, the judge could have been called and said that, this is what has happened. This is the information that we've got.
So even from what you're saying, Justice Lokur, it appears two things follow. A, that the mechanism is only applied selectively. In some cases it is, in some cases it isn't. Secondly, even when it is applied, it's often applied belatedly. And in the case of Justice Yadav, we're not sure whether it's been applied at all because he's been pretty successful in defying the advice he's been given.
Yes.
That seems to suggest that we don't have a foolproof mechanism for in-house accountability. It depends upon the Chief Justice. It depends upon the person it's being applied to. It depends upon the efficacy with which it's being applied. That is not how a system should be.
Yeah. Yeah, there has to be a standard, you know. If something is wrong, there must be a sort of a, a prima facie inquiry. You see, because what happens is there are, complaints galore that, people make. If somebody loses a case, he will say the judge was corrupt. And that's why I lost the case. I had a very good case. So, these are frivolous kind of complaints and they have to be scrutinized and, considered. But there are other kinds of complaints where there is some material backing them, right? And these two complaints that we are talking about, there is some material backing them. What will happen eventually is a different story altogether. But there is material backing them to take cognizance of these complaints.
I very much want to talk to you about reasons why many people, including former judges, believe that the in house mechanism is infirm, weak, and ineffective. But before I come to that, let me ask you one more question. How common are cases like those of Justice Varma and Justice Yadav, cases where, as you put it, there is genuine worrying material backing them? Are they illustrations of a growing and proliferating problem?
Well, there have been cases in the past. I was told that there are about 6 or 7 cases in the past that have happened. These two are fairly recent. I remember being involved in one of the in-house committees way back in 2008 when an allegation was made about a bribe to a judge. It went to the wrong person. But anyway, there was this allegation of a bribe. So I was a member of
The
that.
Justice Nirmal Yadav case in the Punjab High Court.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, you got it. So we gave a report to the then Chief Justice. What happened, I don't know. But I'm talking about 2008. All right.
I recall correctly, she continued in post for another 2 years till she retired.
Yeah, she continued in the High Court. Then she was transferred to another High Court. She retired from the other High Court. But a criminal prosecution was lodged against her by the CBI. Remember, 2008, 2009, that was around the time when the criminal prosecution was lodged. It has still not concluded, you know. So she's retired. One of the accused persons has died, and the case is still going on. So, in that sense, yes, the mechanism is faulty or it's weak. Okay. But a lot depends on case to case. A lot depends upon the judge, if he wants to fight it out. A lot depends upon the Supreme Court. So, yeah.
Let's talk about specific areas where other judges like yourself have pointed out that the in house mechanism for accountability is faulty, weak. The word they're using is ineffective. It's said to begin with that there is no statutory basis for the procedure and it has limited sanctity within the judiciary itself. For instance, the Rosalind Wilson Memorial Lecture points out that no judges agreed to resign because there was an adverse report by the committee against him or her. That sounds as if the system itself, by its very design, lacks the teeth it should have.
Yes, yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, the case of, Justice Nirmal Yadav that you mentioned, what has happened? Nothing has happened. She continued as a judge. She retired as a judge. So it is, toothless in that sense, right?
Let me put something else to you. I'm once again quoting from the Rosalind Wilson Memorial Lecture. It says there are many instances where misconduct of judges is discussed in public, but in house proceedings against them have never been initiated. Equally, the same lecture says there are cases where allegations against a judge have been made, but the in house mechanism was not activated. In other words, where it applies and where it doesn't apply seems to be selective and arbitrary.
Yeah, I don't know about, the cases that you're mentioning. But you see now, take the case of an allegation that a judge has been bribed to give a particular judgment. An allegation made by one of the litigants. Now, just because the allegation has been made by the litigant, does it mean that the in-house mechanism should kick in? It could be a completely false and a frivolous case. So a lot depends. A lot depends on how that complaint is viewed by the concerned Chief Justice. It could be Chief Justice of the High Court. It could be the Chief Justice of India. You know,
It depends upon how understanding or how forgiving or how strict in applying rules he is.
Not necessarily. I mean, it may not be because, like I said, there are frivolous complaints.
But what about when you have a complaint of the nature of the justice, the other one which we discussed a little while ago? That's
Yeah,
not frivolous, that is serious. It's
yeah,
been
yeah,
seen by millions on video.
yeah,
He's refused to apologize, so we believe. No
yeah,
action further has been taken against him, and he's sitting in court in the Allahabad High Court every day.
yeah, yeah. No, in a situation like that, um, uh, an in-house inquiry should have been conducted, right? In the case that we are talking about, the recent Delhi case, an in-house inquiry has been conducted. So yes, you are right. You are right to the extent that there are some cases in which an in-house inquiry is conducted. There are some cases in which an in-house inquiry is not conducted. You know,
This
so
is where it becomes selective, if not arbitrary.
yeah, but then again, that depends upon the facts of the case or the material that is available on record. You
I
know,
suppose it also depends upon the response of the Chief Justice concerned, whether it's at the High Court level or the Supreme Court level.
not necessary because one would expect the Chief Justice to look at the material dispassionately.
But clearly, the Chief Justice of the day today
Yeah.
has handled the Yadav case very differently to the Varma case.
Yeah, yes, you're right. You're right on that. Now, why that has happened, I don't know. I can't say. Okay, but you're right. It has been handled differently.
And the fact that it's been handled differently, which you concede, raises worrying questions.
Well, yes, it does, in the sense that there is no standard. Okay, what is the standard that you apply?
Which is where we come down to that argument. There is no statutory basis for the procedure, and it doesn't seem to have a logical process that should unfold automatically.
Yeah, you're right. You see, I think to get over this kind of a problem, a bill was introduced in Parliament sometime in 2010, the Judicial Standards and Accountability Bill, right? I don't know whether it was passed by the Lok Sabha or by the Rajya Sabha, but we're talking about something that happened 15 years ago. So there is no law. You're right on that. There is no law, and there should be a law.
Let me put to you a wider philosophical concern about the in house mechanism. It's one that, again, I'm quoting from the Rosalind Wilson Memorial Lecture. The concern is this, that the in house mechanism treats the judiciary as if it's a law and world unto itself. They appoint themselves and then they internally lay down procedures governing their behavior. And some people even call this a form of self governance and say this is the opposite of what is desirable. In other words, accountability should be statutory and formal, not ad hoc and informal and applied selectively, if not arbitrarily.
Yeah, it should be statutory. There's no doubt about that. But, it's like this. Uh, Judges are not the only ones against whom there are complaints. You have bureaucrats against whom there are complaints, right? Now, what is the mechanism for disciplining them? They have a departmental inquiry. Who conducts the departmental inquiry? A senior bureaucrat. Okay, so you can't say that if it happens to judges, then you should have somebody else inquiring into it. But if it happens to bureaucrats, it's perfectly all right if a senior bureaucrat looks into the complaint. You
That
have
is a very fair point. That is a very fair point. But tell me, what happens in countries like the United Kingdom, where also, I presume, fairly serious charges must from time to time be brought against sitting judges? There would be a need to inquire into them. Often there would be a need to take action against them. What happens there? Do they have a system that is statutory and formal, or is it like us, ad hoc, selective, arbitrary?
I don't know. I have no idea what the system in England is, but I can tell you there has been a case fairly recently meaning in the last maybe 1 or 2 years, about very serious allegations against a US Supreme Court judge. Very, very serious allegations.
Financial accusations about receiving money and property.
Yeah.
And it's a sitting Supreme Court judge.
Correct. Going on a cruise and, things like that. What has happened? Nothing has happened. People may have said that you resign. He said, I'm not resigning. You do whatever you want.
So, in other words, the infirmity that we're talking about in the Indian case exists at least in one other country, the United States, where it applies to a sitting Supreme Court judge.
Yeah.
Questions were raised about cruises he'd accepted, money that he'd accepted, I think, to buy houses, and he's refused to act. And the system has refused to act against him also.
Yeah, right. So, this is a very important issue that you have raised, which needs to be deliberated. There was an occasion for Parliament to deliberate upon it in 2010, but it seems they did not.
Tell me something. What sort of system do you think we need? A moment ago, you agreed that it needs to be statutory. Does it need to be also formally known and widely accepted rather than disputed and questioned?
Yeah, it should be known, of course. I mean, there's no secrecy behind it. Whatever law is made by Parliament is known to everybody.
Should it be Parliament that makes the law that determines how judges are held accountable?
Well, it could be Parliament. It could be the Judiciary cannot pass a law, right? So Parliament can and should pass a law in consultation with the Judiciary. How do you regulate this sort of a situation?
So in consultation with Judiciary.
Yeah, in consultation with Judiciary. Otherwise, I don't know, you may have some kind of a law which may be struck down. So there should be a consultation.
Let me read to you once again a very telling passage from the Rosalind Wilson Memorial Lecture, which talks about the nature and character of judges and why there is a need for a formal statutory procedure. The lecture says, judges do not have any preset moral codes embedded in their brains that dictate their behavior the moment they sit on the bench. Indeed, they are as human as the lawyers, plaintiffs, defendants, criminals, witnesses, and police before them. To attribute a greater morality to them merely because of the nature of their office is false and dangerous. And the conclusion that I derive from that passage is that when judges err, they must be held to account and not allowed to get away with it, not treated even leniently. Is that the reason why we need a proper statutory mechanism for holding them to account? Because they're human beings at the end of the day.
Yeah. Accountability at all levels is important. Okay. You have the police and fake encounters. All right. Where is the accountability? You have frivolous prosecutions or prosecutions that are not conducted properly. Where is the accountability of the prosecutor and others? So if you're looking at accountability generally, it is time that we introduced accountability at all levels.
And judges are no exception to that.
Yeah, judges are no exception to this.
And you need a formal statutory mechanism that is well known and widely accepted.
Yes. Let me tell you on the question of accountability. There was a case, I think, in 1949 or something, again, unfortunately, from Allahabad High Court, where on reading the judgment, the Privy Council felt that there is some corruption involved. And 49 or 47, whatever, I don't know. And the judge was removed. Okay, so no mechanism, but you could make out from the judgment that it's a dishonest judgment.
At the end of the day, what's important is the willingness to ensure the integrity of the judiciary. If the top man is determined to ensure that at all cost, at all times, you can do away with the statutory mechanism. When you don't have that willingness, a statutory mechanism becomes a fail-safe guarantee that something at least will happen.
Yeah. But again, we come to another situation where is the law being implemented? Today we have provisions of the law which are not being implemented. I mean, I'm not talking about judges, but you
Well,
have
and
it.
it's clearly, forgive my interrupting, Justice Lokur, not been implemented in the case of Justice Shekhar Yadav.
Yeah, yeah. But that's not a law. That's the
That's
in-house.
the mechanism.
Yeah, it's the
But
in-house.
what's the point of an in-house mechanism of accountability if you don't implement it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Similarly, what's the point of a law if you don't implement it?
Let
You
me
know?
ask you then one last question before I come to how judges are chosen.
Yeah.
If we did have a proper, functioning, well thought out statutory mechanism for in house accountability, do you believe some action would have been taken against former Chief Justice Chandrachud when he invited the Prime Minister to his residence for Aarti on Ganesh Puja? In an
No.
interview to the BBC, he dismissed it as a small courtesy. In
Yeah.
your eyes, was it just a small courtesy, or was it a very serious breach of judicial conduct that sends the wrong message down the line?
Well, it was improper. I would never advocate a situation like this. It was improper. But whether it amounts to misconduct is a separate thing altogether.
Would it have required a rap across the knuckles? An
Who
admonition?
who would give that rap?
Whoever heads the judicial accountability mechanism.
That's him only.
So he should have put out his hand and rapped himself.
Yeah, well, it was improper. That's it, and nothing beyond that.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
The second issue, and in a sense, it arises out of this whole question about how judges are to be made accountable, is the question of how they are chosen. This is critical because many people believe the collegium system, which was devised in the 90s to tackle this, is perhaps not working as perfectly or as acceptably as one would want. And there is a need that maybe we need something else. Before I come to that question of what do we need to replace it, let's talk briefly about why the collegium system isn't working. First of all, it said there is no known criteria for choosing judges, or at least there is no agreed criteria. Many people say it's ad hoc, it's often word of mouth, frequently friends or relatives or favorites are elevated. In your eyes, because you've been a member of the collegium in your time, is that a justified criticism?
I don't think so. It's not that just because the person is a friend of mine, so therefore let me appoint him as a judge. No. There are discussions that are held with the Chief Justice. In fact, it's the Chief Justice of India and the Chief Justice of the High Court who initiate the discussion, right? So, yeah, there have been, some persons who did not deserve to be appointed. They got appointed. How does one check that? There are cases of persons who deserve to be appointed and were appointed, but something went wrong, maybe 3 years later, 4 years later, or 10 years later, and that person turned out to be, not a good person to continue as a judge.
But there is a big difference between the two, isn't there? Someone who deserves to be appointed, who
Yeah.
turns rogue after appointment, is something you cannot do anything about in advance.
Yeah.
It's the risk that you run with every appointment. But
Yeah.
someone who doesn't deserve to be appointed is appointed,
Yeah.
that's clearly a failing in the system.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It is. But then, it's in one sense, it is very subjective. All right.
Isn't that the problem? The subjectivity suggests that there are no known or agreed criteria for appointment.
Yeah, you see, there are criteria. But the criteria has also been waived, by the way. In some cases, it has been waived. Even recently, it has been waived.
And was it wrong to do that?
It was wrong to do that. Yeah. Then why have a criteria? If you're going to waive the criteria, why have a criteria then?
Which again suggests that the collegium operates in a selective and arbitrary way.
In some cases, yes. Yes. But to say that it is arbitrary and selective in every case, would not be correct.
But even if it is arbitrary and selective in some cases,
Yeah.
that's worrying because these are people who will become judges,
Yeah.
these Supreme Court judges, and determine justice for you and me. And if the wrong person's there or someone who doesn't deserve to be there, that is a black mark on justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That person might become the Chief Justice of a High Court, may become a judge of the Supreme Court,
God forbid, Chief Justice of India.
and also possibly the Chief Justice of India. Yes. So it has to be done very, very, very carefully.
But you're telling me it's not done very, very carefully.
Well, it is done in some cases, yes, it is done very carefully,
And in some not.
and in some not. But the not ones are perhaps, maybe just a couple of them, but that's not, it's not an excuse for saying that it's okay. Even if it's, one person, that's bad enough.
Something that is increasingly being said today about the collegium is that it doesn't always elect the best people. Many who are clearly deserving don't become justices of the Supreme Court. Two examples that are often quoted are Justice Akhil Qureshi and Justice Muralidhar.
Yeah.
Many people believe they deserve to be Supreme Court judges, but they weren't made.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. And that's wrong. Why were they not made? I mean, somebody has to answer that question, and you perhaps not get an answer.
Let me put another sort of problem with the collegium to you. When you have a strong executive with a powerful majority in parliament, which is the situation today, the government can simply sit on collegium recommendations, sometimes sit on them for years, thus
Yes.
giving the government an effective veto.
Yeah.
Yet it is precisely the outcome that the collegium was created to avoid. Now it's unable to respond to it. Isn't
Yeah.
that another failing in the system? That what it was created to avoid, it's actually becoming a victim of instead.
Yeah, you're right. You're right on that. So everything has to be discussed, right? Was a veto by the government postulated? No, it was not postulated. And the government could give its point of view, and if the collegium reiterates its decision, its recommendation, accept it. But again, if the government says we're not accepting it, what are you going to do?
But the collegium has failed to take any action against any member of the government, whether at the minister level or the secretary level, when precisely that has happened. They should have been charged with effective contempt of court, but they haven't been.
Yeah, but how far can you go? Supposing you say, all right, the secretary in the Ministry of Law is guilty, and you send him to jail. All right, he spends some time in jail. Does it mean that the person will get appointed? That other person who has been recommended?
If you were to send the secretary in the Ministry of Law, and the next time you send the minister himself, I
Yeah,
can assure you that whoever replaces them will make sure that they don't defy the court.
yeah, but you expect the government to accept all this?
Well, I expect the Supreme Court to do everything in its power and capacity
Should.
to ensure the
Yes.
right thing happens,
Yeah, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
but it's not doing it.
But it's not doing it. Yeah, you're right.
Judges are letting themselves down.
Yeah, if they were doing it, Akhil Qureshi would have come to the Supreme Court. He would have probably been Chief Justice of Madhya Pradesh High Court and then come to the Supreme Court. If they were doing it, Justice Muralidhar would have come to the Supreme Court. But they're not doing it. The persons have been transferred by the Supreme Court, but transfer orders have not been implemented.
This is why Justice Lokur people believe that the collegium is not working properly.
Yes, and I have said it many times that the collegium system needs tweaking at two levels. One is at the consultation level, right? Whom do you select? How do you select? Why do you select? That's, the collegium itself. And then post collegium, when the collegium makes a recommendation, what happens?
What about, specifically speaking, the appointment of judges at the High Court level? There is a view that this is perhaps the most critical level of appointment, because
Yeah.
pretty close to 95, 96% of Supreme Court judges are actually people elevated from the High Court judiciary.
Yes.
The selection process for the High Court judiciary is inadequate or poor or faulty, that will eventually, in due course, also afflict the Supreme Court. But are you concerned that perhaps at the High Court level, the collegium system is at its most weak and most infirm?
I wouldn't say it is most weak or infirm. There are several problems in the high courts. One is that there are persons, good lawyers, for example, who say that we're not interested in being appointed as judges. Okay, so you may not get the best. Okay, that's one thing that happens. Second, you have a huge pool. How do whatever it is? I mean, I don't think the judges will know every lawyer who's there, who's practicing before them. Okay, there may be some very good ones in the districts, but they don't come to the High Court. So you overlook them because you don't know who they are. Third, there are instances in every High Court, the Chief Justice is an outsider. And there are instances where number one and number two after the Chief Justice are also outsiders.
So they don't know the lawyers of the state.
They don't know the lawyers of the state. Okay, so then what do? You wait until you get to know them. By the time you get to know them, it's probably about 5 or 6 months.
And by that time, you've been transferred away, possibly.
Probably you've been transferred away. Yeah.
But then that is a critical lapse in the way High Court judges are chosen.
Yeah.
Which is why people say perhaps the collegium system is maybe not at its most infirm, but is particularly infirm and weak at the High Court level.
Yes. That's why, like I said earlier, it does need tweaking.
Surely it needs more than just tweaking. Tweaking just suggests gentle changes. We need fairly substantial changes.
Yeah, okay.
Tell me, if the collegium system isn't working as we would like it to, if it's working inadequately, as I've been repeatedly saying, I presume we need a different, better way of choosing judges. The question is, what should it be? Can we revive in some different shape and form the National Judicial Commission, which the Supreme Court struck down in 2015? Can we amend the collegium system sufficiently to make it function in a way that would be adequate and proper? Or are both impractical?
Changes need to be brought about. There is no doubt about it. Actually, at the present moment, in the assignment that I'm holding of the Internal Justice Council, we are in the process of selecting judges. Okay. And I have learned a lot. I don't want to tell you, the details of what we are doing, but I have learned a lot about selecting judges. Okay. Now, perhaps some of the elements can be introduced in our process. That is one. The second.
Can you suggest what those elements would amount to without naming judges?
For example, there's a written test. Okay, there's an interview. It's not an interaction, but it's an interview. Now, how many people in India would be prepared to undertake a written test for being appointed as a judge of the High Court? Okay, probably none. But for the district court, yes, they have to undergo a test.
In other words, people who believe they are good lawyers would not want to subject themselves to a written test or an interview. They would consider it beneath them.
Yeah, right. So you have these problems. Second, when you talk about a large high court, Delhi, of course, is a large high court, but it's a small city. You talk about Maharashtra, for example. You have 3 judges, Chief Justice and 2 other judges who are supposed to know the lawyers in Mumbai, in Nagpur, in Aurangabad, and in Goa. for appointment as judges. It's impossible. So why can't you have a much broader collegium? Instead of 3 judges, maybe have 5 judges, maybe have 7 judges. Have informal consultations with the other judges who may be able to give you inputs.
In other words, there are many steps and measures that can be adopted.
Yeah.
Strengthen the collegium system.
Yeah.
Widen the number of people who are consulted, widen the number of judges who are members of it.
Yeah.
Perhaps impose stricter scrutiny on those that you are selecting, make them go through a procedure which may be unappealing to them, but it's necessary because you need to improve the quality of judges that are chosen. The problem is we don't have consensus on these things.
Yeah, that's why earlier on I had said that we need to have a debate and discussion on this. It's not, I mean, we can talk about it, but
Who's the we? Are you talking about judges within the community of the judiciary, or are you talking about judges and the executive together sitting down?
But the judges for one, because the collegium system consists of judges. So they have to decide how to strengthen it, put it to the executive. I mean, you have this memorandum of procedure, which is not being followed. Okay. Why is it not being followed? What can we as judges do about it? So there is definitely a need for a detailed discussion on this.
So we've come to the following conclusion, Justice Lokur. We need to change the way judges are chosen.
Yes.
It can be a fairly serious problem, and it will certainly become a worse problem if it is not tackled quickly.
Yes.
We don't have an obvious and agreed solution. We have to debate and discuss to come up with a solution, but even that debate and discussion is not happening.
Yeah, it's not happening, and it should happen. I've been advocating introspection leading to a debate and discussion, but it's not happening.
My last question. This is a fairly urgent issue. Time is not on our side.
Yeah, you're right. Time is not on our side.
Justice Lokur, thank you very much for the time you've given me. I'm deeply grateful for the way you've addressed both the big issues we discussed, the infirmity, as I called it, of the in-house mechanism for accountability, and the weakness of the way judges are chosen. I'm very grateful to you. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.